Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the show. And if you guys haven't had a chance to check it out, go and check out the Nature Care Solutions Facebook page that we put together. It's actually a really fun project that Tay and I have been working on. And we just want to create a community where people are starting to learn a lot of the fundamentals around natural healing. So we're sharing some really cool information on how to use weeds as medicine, what you can eat when a lot of the stuff that we pick up and throw, this is like going on with gardening right now. So much stuff that we want to get rid of these weeds, but so much of that stuff is actually powerful medicine. And so we want to share some of that with you guys and stuff that we do and how we actually even dehydrate that and make medicines out of it. I want to show you how we do some of the different things that we do with our kids to make sure that they stay healthy. We want to share different fun recipes. Taya's mom makes these amazing Persian meals, and so we're going to start to recruit her and start to share some of her recipes with you guys too, because particularly the Persian diet is uses a lot of different types of herbs and spices and really healthy food. So we want to get that stuff out. We want to create an environment where people are able to start to share their input and their information and share recipes, share different strategies, and just make this really awesome resource that you can come back to and share information with like-minded people that are really wanting to learn how to live a more healthy, natural lifestyle. So I'll put the link there and you guys can go and check that out. This is also the last week to register for the Nature Care Solutions Reclaim Your Power to Heal online live course with me that will be starting on Sunday. So if you guys haven't checked that out, go click there, check out all the information. It's going to be an absolutely phenomenal course and cover so much amazing details on what you guys can do to manage a myriad of ailments and common scenarios that you might encounter and how you can do that naturally without medications. All right, everybody. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode with Dr. Lotte. We had a really great interview with her, and we talked about ancestral wounds and our children, how we can support them, and how they can be such a learning tool for us as well. We look at unraveling these patterns of illness that we create. Dr. Lotte has had a couple of near-death experiences. She is a medical medium. She's also a naturopathic physician, a wealth of information, and a really important interview, I think, at this time. All right, everybody. Thank you so much, and really appreciate you guys watching this show. If it's beneficial to you, please like, subscribe, share. All of that helps us so much to get this content out. Make sure you check out the Facebook group. I think that's going to be wonderful, and we'd love to have your input and your support there as well. It's going to be a really great community service, so I think we're all going to be supporting each other as we move forward. And check out the Nature Care Solutions Reclaim Your Power to Heal if you haven't already. All right, everybody, take care, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspire Health Podcast. And we are continuing on with the series on life, death, and beyond, exploring our greater reality. And today we have Dr. Lotte Valentin. And Dr. Lotte is a fellow naturopathic doctor and author. She's author of this book right here that we are going to talk about today, Med School After Menopause, The Journey of My Soul. And Dr. Lotte is also a evidential psychic medium. She's a medical medium. She does ancestral healing. She's a keynote speaker. She's done a lot of different things, and she's described as an oracle who has the ability to touch the heights and move into the power of the mystic, prophet, and the seer. And she's had 2 near-death out-of-body experiences, which resulted in her becoming clairvoyant, clairaudient, and clairsentient and activating her life path. She was then guided to attend medical school as well as become an author and evidential medium. Dr. Lotte completed her medical school prerequisites and was accepted into med school at the age of 54, and then wrote a book on her entire journey of that. So we are going to talk to her today and looking forward to it. So welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I also think it's fun too when I get to talk to fellow naturopathic doctors as well, because it really is a different sort of perspective on health and medicine. And you've done a lot of different pieces. What in this series, we've talked to people from all over the map, and we've talked to several people that have had near-death experiences or studied near-death experiences. And I find like there's similarities and there's all very unique pieces to it. And so part of why we're having these conversations is just to explore what lies beyond. One thing that you had said when I was reading your book was that you don't fear death anymore. And I've found that to be a common scenario with a lot of people that have actually had near-death experiences. I'm wondering if you can start with a little bit of the experiences that you've had and then how that really transitioned into the way that you're living. That kind of opens up into a big question right off the bat.
All right. So how I became not afraid of death after my near-death experiences,
Yeah, because
right?
it's one of the reasons why we want to have these conversations, because there's so much fear wrapped up into so much that we do, death being, I
Mhm.
think, one of the fundamental ones. And what's come up over and over again is people that have actually crossed over come back and they're not scared. And so we're hoping we can share that a little bit more, because I think that really influences how we live life when we're not so scared of death.
Or maybe even expressing or speaking of your near-death experiences and what that was like. And if you could describe that a little bit more for the audience.
Yeah. So let's start with the not fear of death. So after the near-death experience, I understood that life is really eternal. And going into these near-death experiences, I did not have any beliefs in the afterlife, the spirit world. I did not believe in any religion. I did not believe in God, Jesus, angels, anything that you could not prove to me with science. I did not believe. So I came from that very scientific, materialistic worldview, and then had my near-death experience. And I can talk about what happened in each one, but that first near-death experience, I was in the ER, and the first thing I thought was, how can I be outside my body and still be me? So that was the realization that the body is just a vehicle for the soul or the spirit while we're in this dimension or on our journey here on earth. And so life really is eternal. And so when we die and we pass on to the other side, right? So I became a medium after I graduated from medical school, and that's a whole journey in itself, how that developed. But once you understand that life is eternal and that we can communicate with the spirit world, you can't make things up for a client saying, oh, your grandmother lived here and she lived on a farm and there was pigs outside the door and she made this birthday cake for you every year. And right, you can't make these things up. So you know that the spirit world is actually alive and well on the other side, and they guide us in our everyday life. And many people have had spiritual experiences. So once I started studying mediumship, I realized how many people have had experiences where once I opened up and talked about it, they would tell me stories of, my grandmother, I saw her once and she stood by the bureau, or my dad showed up and told me that my car keys are in this drawer and I've been looking for them. So we know that we can have communication. It's just a matter for all of us to wake up and tune into that.
Well, that's a good question. So from that perspective, how do people start to connect with that? Because it sounds like through reading your book and listening to some of the work that you've done, I think you were connected to that early on, maybe not so consciously, or that got sort of separated. But how did that change so much after you had the first near-death experience? It sounds like it really just all came in, and then you found all the different clairaudient and clairsentient, and everything just started to kind of come in. For people that maybe don't want to have an NDE in order to connect to that, what would be some of the other ways that they can start that process? Because I totally agree with you. I think all of that's right there, and it's a lot thinner than we think it is to access it. What are some of the ways that the average person can start to connect to that type of guidance?
I think the most important thing in order to connect to the spirit world is to meditate. And every medium that I have come across and my teachers, they all say the same thing, because we have to create the stillness within us. So when you think about how when we speak to each other, right, and how we hear and how we see, but you're going to connect to something that we can't just readily see with our senses. You're tuning in using other senses, right? Your sixth sense in a way, right? That you're tuning in across the veil. So you have to fine tune that telepathic hearing and seeing that is not just with your eyes and ears. But the only way you can really tune in is to create that peace and stillness within yourself first. Because once you do that, it's the way I look at it is like you raise your little antenna up, but the antenna is withdrawn right now. It's like you're going through the car wash, the antenna is down, and you come out of the car wash, you raise your little antenna back up. But that is really what you're doing when you're meditating and creating that stillness within, is that you're learning to raise that antenna up so that you can hear what's not readily available in this dimension. So it's not like we just pick up a cell phone to communicate with the spirit world. Some people, have very specific questions, but the way the spirit world tends to operate is we ask them, okay, I know I have your grandmother or your father with me. What is it that you came in to say? Because imagine being in the spirit world and you keep asking them questions all the time. Where did you live? What did you do? Blah, 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 right? They came in to give a specific message. And so it's important to get to that message. And once you have clarified that this is the person, and because it's not really a cell phone reception, it is more, it just depends. The spirit world itself they project themselves the way that they appeared here on earth. So if it's somebody that did not communicate well while they were alive, they're not going to be great communicators on the other side. So that comes through. And when you communicate with a spirit that was very open and happy and lovable and communicative, that comes through in the reading, and you get that same, oh, this is somebody who loves to communicate, and this is a man who hugged everyone, told jokes, laughed a lot. That comes through. But when you have somebody that didn't, that also comes through. It was really difficult to make this person say what it is that they came to say. But I know that this person, for example, died of a specific disease, and I know it's your mother. Yes, yes, yes. And then the client typically will say, well, that's exactly who they were when they were alive. They had a hard time communicating any kind of feelings or emotions. And that again comes through. So the person, they might have healed being on the other side, right? Because we all heal going to the other side. We realize all the mistakes we've made, etc. But if they showed up being, the happy person who tells jokes, but in real life, they were the quiet person who was difficult to communicate with, then nobody would recognize them. So you kind of have to understand how the spirit world works when you're communicating with them. But the best way would be to create calmness and stillness and meditate to create your own antenna.
Mm-hmm. Is it pretty common that a lot of spirits on the other side want to come back and relay messages to loved ones that are still here?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And is there any common messages that you've seen kind of over and over again? Is there certain messages that you're seeing, almost themes that are important for spirits on the other side to want to relay to people that are still here?
No, it's so individual. I would say it's very individual. I've had, for example, somebody who committed suicide, and it was this person's brother. And I understood that this person had always been depressed, and she was always watching over her brother, and she felt guilty that she had failed on her watch. And literally he came through to say, it's not your fault. This would have happened anyway. This was my life. This is my journey. Basically, I incarnated. This is what was supposed to happen. And that person then can heal, and because the forgiveness is there. And so now, for the first time in her life, because this had been 10 or 15 years since he committed suicide, but this whole time she had felt like she failed on her watch, but she hadn't. And so there is a lot of healing that can come through. People can come through. Sometimes people just come through to give support and say, we're so proud of you and we love you and we're here. And other times people come through and ask for forgiveness, and they say, I know I was a terrible person during my life, and I was a terrible father, and there might have been some kind of abuse, and they're asking for forgiveness. And so again, it creates healing, but it could be anything from A to Z. It just depends on what that person is coming in for.
Yeah. Yeah, but I can imagine that that just opens up a door for that person to move to the next phase of their healing journey, just from sometimes hearing something that just lets you, it's like that permission slip that just lets them move to the next phase.
Absolutely. Because it creates so much healing, connecting, and then be able to close that door and move on.
Hmm.
Mm.
You know, Dr. Lotte, from your experience, because you've got a really good diverse experiences now with kind of having a naturopathic medical profession and going through all of that type of training, and then having all of this aspect of tied with mediumship and whatnot. Has it changed? What is your view of healing changed? How has it sort of evolved over the years, and what do you feel really is at the root of illness and what's required for true healing to really take place?
I would say it depends what is ailing the patient. Number one, I get a lot of patients and clients that, because they know I work spiritually with people as well, will say, I was diagnosed with cancer, and how do I heal this? Well, my answer is always, you have to heal all of it. You can't just focus on the physical or just focus on the spiritual. People say, I'm going to pray, I'm going to meditate, I know I can heal this, I'm going to set the intentions, etc. But the truth is that we don't know what ticket we pulled for this incarnation. What is the purpose of that person's life path? Is this person supposed to heal with chemotherapy or with nutrition and herbs or meditation or all of the above? And we don't know what that ticket is, but you have to work on the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual to really create healing, because as we know, the Western world is really good at treating the symptoms and suppressing symptoms, and so that we can go on with our daily life, but the disease is still there. And then you have people, so sometimes people are born with a disease, right? Children are born with tumors. They didn't sit in the womb telling themselves negative thoughts to create the tumor. But then we also know that the environment plays a big role and can create disease. But again, we don't know which ticket we hold. Are we holding the ticket to, I had a terrible childhood with lots of abuse of different kinds, and now I have all this negative self-talk, and I never express my emotions. I'm a people pleaser, and now I have breast cancer because I've suppressed all my emotions my whole life, right? We don't know what it is that caused it. Is it the environment? We know that these kinds of environment can create some type of disease, but we also don't know what ticket that person holds. So we have to work on all aspects to create healing.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really well said. And I remember one of my old teachers, Dr. David Hawkins, and he would often say, do everything. You know, when someone has some, he would talk about if someone was dealing with, say, depression or something, he would say, you might need to get counseling, you might need to join a group like AA and do a spiritual sort of aspect of stuff. You might need nutrition, you might need medication. You don't know what exactly you're going to require. I think from that place, it's like it leaves you in a place of just openness for all possibilities to see what's going to land on. Where do you think the role of the individual's intuition can assist us in guiding, so we're not always just doing, dozens and dozens of things at one time? Where does that play into the role of healing from the individual's perspective?
The individual's own intuition. Yeah. So I always tell my patients, follow your intuition, follow your gut. If you don't feel that this is the right move to make in order to create a path to healing, then, listen to that. But it's also dangerous because sometimes I think people convince themselves that they can heal. And I've seen patients that, you try to convince them, no, this is what you need to do. I'm going to refer you to this kind of a doctor because you need this help. This is not something that you can just think away. And I tell people that when something has manifested in the physical body, you also need to use the tools in the physical world to create that healing, because it's the physical tools that's going to create the physical healing. You got a spiritual and emotional component to this, like you can see in ancestral healing and how we inherit the traumas of our ancestors and the wrongdoings of our ancestors. And that comes back in an emotional and spiritual and physical pattern. But again, we have to work with that component as well, because otherwise we do all these great physical things now to create healing for the physical body. But what's going on emotionally and with the ancestral lineage is still there. So you also have to work on that and create healing for that, because otherwise you're still in that loop, which created the disease in the first place. So I'm saying, so you really have to take a broader look at how to create healing. But the way we work in the Western world, and even though I'm a naturopathic physician, we're still sort of part of that Western medicine world, because that's how we're trained. We're trained as regular physicians that also prescribe pharmaceutical medicine. But you have to incorporate that. And I think hopefully we'll see a movement towards that. But the systems that we have built, the physician doesn't have time. They see so many patients in one day. If they can get 15 minutes, how are they supposed to learn what ails this person and what family they came from? What did their ancestors look like? Do we have an emotional and spiritual component to why this person got sick in the first place? But the way our system is set up, the physicians really don't have time. I think many physicians they wanted to be a doctor because they wanted to help people and they wanted to create healing. They wanted to understand what caused that disease in the first place. But then they get out of med school and they're working within the system of the insurance industry, and you got to see, 4 patients an hour, and there's no time for them to really understand, who this person is and why they're sick. So going back to the roots, the way we had a family physician, look back 100 years, the family physician comes to the farm with his little bag and, somebody is sick. And he knew everybody on that farm. He knew the grandparents and all the way down to the grandkids, right? Everybody. And he understood the environment they were in, and he could help them in such a different way. But now we have created this Western medicine system that kind of works like a McDonald's drive-through. You just come in, you say what the problem is, the doctor gives you a prescription, and then the next you're on your way. So it's going to take a lot of work to go back to that system. But I think the people themselves, it's always has to be the patients, because they are the ones that are suffering. They're the ones that are not getting treated correctly.
Well, and I definitely think there's more of a desire for a shift in that too. I mean, you definitely find, it's a changing world, because it's also like with how much information is available. I find a lot of times patients know more about their unique problem than a lot of times the doctor does when you come in. And if you don't have time to actually investigate that, which sometimes definitely happens in conventional systems, it's just such a busy, they don't have time to kind of investigate everything. I think everybody gets frustrated. The doctors get frustrated because they sometimes don't know what the patient's talking about, and the patient's frustrated because the doctor doesn't know what they're talking about either. And so there's opening up where people are wanting to have a little more time and be able to explore a lot of depths to what's going on. And a lot of people, I think, are getting more and more aware that, they have a physical stuff, but there's also all these other bodies of health that often play into it. And I think they're recognizing that they want to be able to work with all of it, because they really want to start to heal. So you mentioned around intuition, which I think is a really important point, because a lot of the different series have been trying to help people arrive more back at a genuine sense of more inner authority. Because I think in a lot of ways we've just outsourced so much stuff to other people, and we're trying to get used again to running and filtering everything back through ourselves and see where it lands for us. But I find, just like you had mentioned, there can be it can be tricky sometimes when we're not used to being connected to our intuition. Sometimes it's like, is that intuition, or is that actually more like my ego mind identity telling me that I should be doing this or whatever? How do you work with that? How can people start to discern the difference between what really is higher guidance when it's coming in versus when we're almost being kind of tricked by the same patterns and false identifications and perceptions that we often just accumulate and kind of run on autopilot, because we can talk ourselves into anything pretty easily and think that it's coming from our higher intuition.
Yes. And how do you separate the ego from receiving messages from somewhere else, or your higher self?
Yeah, because it's
or the greater consciousness? And again, it's a matter of creating that stillness and constantly ask yourself, is that my brain? Did that message come from my brain or did it come from somewhere else? Sometimes, the way I describe it in the book, it's kind of telepathic hearing. You know that it's not coming from your brain. In the beginning, I didn't know. So after my first near-death experience in the ER, that next day in the hospital, I heard my sister-in-law, and she was in the left corner of the ceiling, and she said, "Oh, everything, you're going to be okay." And I'm thinking I'm losing my mind because I just left my body the day before in the ER. And now I think I can hear the spirit world. So it was a frightening experience because I didn't believe in any of it. And then as time went on, the spirit world would come in and visit me. And how do I learn to trust that? So whenever I heard something, saw something, I would write it down. So I would write it down in a book back then because we didn't have these fancy cell phones to take notes on. So this is my first near-death experience was in 1992. So the whole 1990s, I'm just constantly writing things down on a piece of paper or in a notebook, or telling my kids, my husband, what I had seen or experienced or heard. And that way I knew that when it happened, it wasn't a deja vu. But in the beginning, I thought, this is just the deja vu. I thought I heard this yesterday or saw this. And that way I could go back and check in my notebook and say, okay, it's not a deja vu. It's real. And so then that developed a trust. And I understood when the messages or the visions come in this way, it's coming from somewhere else. It's not my brain. Right. So you're tuning into the greater consciousness.
Yeah, one area in your book when you were talking about how to sort of cultivate those abilities to connect more with clairvoyance and clairsentient and whatnot, and you specifically said to acknowledge what you see, hear, and feel, and I think that's so important, both for that and just in general to bring more of ourselves into the world a little bit more. I think so often we tend to be more worried about what's outside of us than what's inside of us. So how does one incorporate more of that? Is it just writing it down? Even the process of starting to really genuinely acknowledge what we see here and what we feel inside, because from my perspective, that's one of the major, at least what I've seen clinically, I feel like that's one of the major roots for illness, is when we don't acknowledge that and we actually then operate in our life out of accordance with what we're not necessarily acknowledging that we know to be true. When I think like, what I know versus what I'm sort of telling myself up top here, how do you start to reconcile those pieces of things?
Yeah, it's not easy because it's the subconscious mind that drives those thoughts and drives that behavior in people, because we learned those things when we were just an infant or a toddler. And it's the survival mechanism of how to get along with your parents, how to get along with your mom or dad or siblings, and the way you were raised. And that plays a huge role, because the way that, let's say, the mother can't understand the child and doesn't recognize the child for anything, but that mother was typically also not recognized. So she wasn't seen and heard by her mother. And now she has children and her children are not seen and heard by her because nobody taught her. So the pattern just gets passed down through the generations. So that's why it becomes an ancestral wound, because the patterns are repeated through the generations. And that is the subconscious mind, because that we were born into that. And so you perceive life through that lens that you developed when you were just a toddler. This is how the world operates. This is what you do when you're in this predicament. That's what you were taught. And then you react the exact same way. And so then it becomes an ancestral wound. But those ancestral wounds might also feed certain diseases. So I don't know if you've heard about Gabor Mate's work, When the Body Says No. It's fascinating because they had analysis, I believe it was on breast cancer, and they did a questionnaire, and they could predict who was going to have a positive cancer biopsy just based on the questionnaire and how these women dealt with different emotional issues. So we know the environment has a huge effect on what disease we're gonna carry. And how do you get around that? You meditate and you tune into, it's so much self-work because you have to unravel that whole thread. Why am I thinking this? Why am I having negative thoughts? Why am I negative? The whole United States is going through some trauma healing because there's so much negativity, but that comes from their generation. So look at your family. How did your parents react? Many times it's just a pattern that's repeating. And we need to cooperate. We need to work together because we're just going to make ourselves extinct if we don't. So we have to work together in the whole world instead of pretending that what we think is the best, because that's often short-sighted and involves greed and money and politics. And we need to put that aside and really start working together in order to create healing in this world. And once we do that, for every person, the way I look at it, every person that I can help heal, because everybody heals themselves in the end, right? We're a facilitator for healing, working as a physician or a medical medium. But I'm just facilitating their journey to help them find healing on their own. Because once that light bulb goes off in their head and they say, oh my gosh, now I understand why it is that I'm repeating all these patterns, because that's how I was raised. That was my conditioning in early childhood. And once you see that, you can stop that cycle, that energy loop that you're in, to create healing for it. And now that just goes away because you created healing. So it's a lot of self-work that has to take place, and not everybody's ready to step up to that plate, because a lot of people go to the doctor and they would just like a pill and feel better and go back to their regular life. They're not ready to take on that journey and creating healing. But once they do, then other people will heal as a result, because in the end, we are all connected. So we're all part of one consciousness. And once we heal one person, that person's frequency changes, but everybody that comes in contact with that person is also going to be changed by that person, because everything is interconnected. So it's a big deal for people to take that step and create healing for themselves, because that healing that they now created for themselves is going to spread out through the world, because we're all connected.
Beautiful. So it's like taking the subconscious and bringing it into the conscious so that you can see it clearly. And from that point, you're no longer controlled by previous programming. You're actually making conscious choices from here on end. Is that how you see it?
Yes, that's a good way of putting it, because you're bringing the unconscious pattern to the surface so that you can understand it and see it.
When you talk about the ancestral patterns, and we're aware of all of those as well, how that works, and it totally makes me think of the way Hahnemann talked about it with miasms. It's this concept of these transgenerational patterns that are passed around, and even like you said, they will show up in specific body tissues and creating different specific patterns, whether that's a cancerous miasm or a psychotic miasm or something along those lines. I find that's another piece that people can even explore to see where that fits. I think it's another layer of working with the different components of it. But when we get back to then children, you have a whole chapter in your book on the wisdom of children, which I think is really beautiful. And I'd like to bring a little bit of awareness to that, because part of that is, I really feel too that if we, well, and I know this to be true even from indigenous medicine, it's like when we heal, we heal forward and backwards, right? I mean, this concept of time is sort of really restricted to this specific physical incarnation on Earth. It doesn't work the same way when we sort of go beyond it. When we create a real profound healing, we heal generations forward and we heal generations backwards. From a perspective of our children, where do we start the process of not creating the same patterns in them? What are some of the biggest lessons you've learned with the kids, and that the kids can teach us?
Right. So I would say the biggest lesson is to heal ourselves, because if you heal yourself, then you're not going to pass on the pattern. And so your kids are going to be better off. So the more emotional and spiritual healing you do yourself, the better off your kids are going to be, because you're not passing down things that weren't that were not good, that have been going on in your family for generations. And in terms of children, they're a gift to us too. So we're incarnate maybe as soul families. So when you're thinking about you were sitting up there in the spirit world at the incarnation cafeteria, and you looked at the menu and you said, well, I'm going to take, number 36, and I'll take number 7, 404, right? And you pick all the different things you're going to learn in this life. And then you come down to earth and you completely forgot what you signed up for, right? But when you're sitting there at this incarnation coffee bar up in the spirit world, you're saying, well, I need a child. I need a child that's going to teach me these different things. Oh, I need to come in and do that. Okay, great. Do you want to be my soul baby? Okay, great. Perfect. Okay, we need some other kids too. I need one for the father, that he needs to learn this, right? So he's talking to that soul child. And then you put together this soul family that's absolutely perfect for all the different family members, for all the different things they're going to learn in this life. So when you look at your kids and you're really annoyed by things that they do, you might, because it's triggering things for you, because you incarnated to have this thing healed. That's why you got this child that's triggering, pushing your buttons all the time, so that you can then create patience and whatever it is that you have to work on. But if we come in as a soul family, then it makes perfect sense that, well, this child needs this, and I'm having a really hard time because I need to learn this in my life. And so they can be a messenger, so to speak, for us to have our own development continue. Because many times I think parents just shoot down their kids. No, be quiet, sit still, don't do that, right? And we boss them around instead of saying, why is it that this child keeps doing this over and over? What's the lesson for me here? Is it just that I'm supposed to be patient, or is this, this child is really creative and I'm a scientist, and now I have to figure out how to get this child to develop. So there's always different ways of looking at it, but I think it's important to keep a really open mind. And the more we let our children be in nature, run and play, and because that is how children learn. It's not by sitting at a desk doing worksheets. I think the more free time they have to explore things that they would like to explore, the better off they are. The more activities we stuff down their throat, the more worksheets, the more homework, the more sitting still, the worse off they are, because children learn naturally by doing and seeing. It's like monkey see, monkey do. So they need that freedom.
I was speaking with a friend the other day, and she was saying that one of her children in particular, one of 3, was basically sent to be here, she felt, in order to be a teacher. And afterward, I turned to my husband and I said to Jason, I feel like every single one of my 3 kids have been by my biggest teachers, because they have a way of pulling at your heartstring. And at the same time, like you said, they're here to teach us very valuable lessons. And because of that close connection that we have with them, it's not something that we can just walk away from and say, no, I'm not going to have any of that relationship, or I'm not going to have that interaction. They're in your face on a day-to-day basis, on a moment-to-moment basis. So I really do feel like my children are my biggest and most challenging teachers, in that they hold me accountable on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and I like how you said, don't suppress their voices. And it's so true, because, and this is kind of a mix. I know I found personally, it's like, if I'm caught up in life too much and I'm busy and I've got too many things going on, then I find that I'm not in the place where I am able to receive their voice as much. It's easier to kind of like, okay, quiet. I need to get stuff done. So there's almost this blend of like, if we're in an environment where we're not creating the space to be able to even allow that to present itself so that we can hear it, I feel like on some level, then we need to figure out how to start to change things around a little bit so that we can show up and allow their voice to be totally heard and be present with it, rather than just trying to push it off to the side because we're too busy doing other things. I feel like we live in a society that's almost like that too much, and that is starting, I hopefully, to change a little bit more too.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And, kids, people are so busy. We're busy. We live in an information world, and we got to keep up with emails and text messages. We're constantly looking at our phones and our emails, and did I call this person back? And when you think just even 20 years ago how different it was, we didn't have that. And so my kids are in their 30s now, and so they were raised in the 80s and 90s. My kids were born in the 80s and 90s, and it was so different then than it is today, because we weren't as sidetracked. We went to the library to borrow the books. Amazon was just coming out, right? My oldest was in third grade, I think, when he wrote a review of one of the books, and he won $100 gift card from Amazon to buy more books. And he was so excited. And it was just the beginning of Amazon. But we went to the library, we went to the playground. Now there's so much, be quiet, go play this game, go work on your phone, computer, whatever. And it's just more sitting still instead of being out and being part of the world. But that is also what's lacking. And we need to be more in nature to understand that we are part of nature versus living on top of the world. We are living in the world. We are part of the world. We are living beings. We're just another creature here on earth. But we've lost that connection. And granted, all the technology is wonderful. We connect with people like we're connecting right now. And we didn't have that before. But we need to also create a balance of, computer time, online time, whatever. But also we need that connection back to our roots and who we are and why we're here. Because we have to come together as a human race and accept people from all walks of life and work together to create a better world, because we are in a crisis, which is why we see so much disaster in the world right now.
I'm reading a book on natural farming right now by this Japanese farmer, and it's so beautiful, and it's also so simple in so many ways, and this is sort of what I feel like we need to come back to. I mean, a lot of what he talks about is how, he's very, very adamant about the fact that you really actually have to do very little when you are operating within nature principles. It's like you're more letting that take the reins, and you're just kind of listening and following the guidance of it. It says when we've kind of done from sort of more of like a man-made societies, he goes, we keep creating more and more stuff, which then we have to find more and more solutions for. And often we've created problems, and now we have to find a solution for the problem. And then we kind of tap ourselves on the back for finding another solution for a problem. Or he says, most of it, you just need to get rid of so much. And he says a lot of it is what he took as the approach with farming was, what don't I need and what can I get rid of? And it's less and less and less. And then from that place, I think then we're able to connect with more inherent meaning, because there's just not so much stuff in the way of everything. So I think we've gone really far to one end, and now we're finding our way to maybe create some more balance in line with what you were just talking about, with why we're in such a crisis right now. And I think it's all there to come up to show us very clearly, so that we can see it, so that we can actually make new choices and choose a new direction. So we have to be able to see it so that we can make new choices. But when I'm reading the natural farming, there's just something that feels so comforting inside me, because it just seems so simple and so much space to be connected to things that really hold more inherent meaning. I think the more layers that have come up, we've got separated and distracted from true meaning. And we've kind of substituted for being busy or being distracted.
Absolutely. The true meaning of life. Why are we here? What is your life purpose? But like you said, we get so busy with just everyday life that we don't even have time to think about it. Mm-hmm. But that is, how you become, that's also how you tune into your own intuition. That's how you connect to the spirit world, is asking yourself these questions and then sitting silent in silence or meditation music, but sitting in meditation to reconnect, because you have to reconnect with yourself in order to connect up and out.
And, Dr. Lotte, it's really, for a person who hasn't done that ever, that can be really challenging initially to sit with their own stuff, because I feel like oftentimes even how our society has been created is there's constantly distractions, whether it's, watching news programs or sports programs, or like you had alluded to earlier, taking kids from one extracurricular program to another, just keeping them busy and occupied. So this is our culture. This is our society up to now. And for a person to actually become still, there is a lot of agitation and inner turbulence and discomfort, whether it comes up on in the form of incessant thoughts, one thought after another, a busy mind, or emotions arising, or physical discomforts. How does one begin to sit in order to find that stillness, when stillness is the last thing that they're even able to grasp or tap into at that moment?
Yeah. It's hard in the beginning, but I tell people that I work with, I say, start with 5 minutes, 5 minutes a day, and then make it 5 minutes twice a day, 5 minutes 3 times a day. Make these little tiny timeouts, and then you increase it, and you make it 10 minutes. And so do you have 5 minutes, even if you're working, go outside, sit on the park bench for 5 minutes, put your timer on your cell phone and just sit there. Even if you're just looking at the trees or listening to the birds, but just create some calm and peace, because that is literally our nervous systems. Our nervous systems is so in tune with everything that's going on all the time. And it's almost like we're constantly overstimulated because we have so many things going on all the time. And it's when we bring that stillness back in, our mind clears. We sleep better, we think better, we're happier persons, because we're creating that calm and peace. And if you have children, teach your children to meditate every day. If they're younger children, 1 minute at the dinner table, everybody close their eyes and maybe play some calm music for a minute. And now we're going to eat, but just bring that nervous system down, because your children are also co-regulating their nervous system with your nervous systems. So if you're busy and just too busy all the time and you can't calm down, guess what? Your children are doing the same thing because they're regulating their nervous systems from you. So it's really important just to create, a calmer and more peaceful life for yourself, just to incorporate that into your daily activities.
I think that's a really inconvenient thing for people to hear sometimes, especially for parents, because it's true. Like we've known this to be true in the way that how it is that we're showing up in the moment is essentially going to be how it is that we're teaching our children and role modeling for them. So in order for us to be able to support our children effectively, we have to essentially show up for ourselves in the way that we feel it's most conducive to well-being and good health. I know for us, I have an 18-year-old as well as a now 7 and a 5-year-old. And for our little ones, we've chosen not to introduce any digital devices or we don't have a TV at home either. So the programming that goes on television and through the digital devices with the overstimulation of the nervous system is so apparent for us to see now and to know, because we just don't do it that often. We have windows for when we do. And even going through town, we live just outside of the city, and just going through the city the last couple of days, like I'm feeling a little depleted today, because I know the effects of there's abundance of cell towers in the cities. There's all sorts of stimulation. But I know that, any visit into town, and I'm feeling pretty tired for the next couple of days, just recovering. But folks who are within that environment on a daily basis, nonetheless children, because you're so inundated by that level of stimulation and energy, you might not even be aware of it because there's nothing, your point of reference to be able to gauge what it is that you're currently in is limited. But to get a detox, to actually, like you mentioned, coming out and spending time in stillness and going into nature, these are really ways that we can actually detox from that overstimulation or the overconsumption of technology. And those are really vitally important for all of us to be taking the time to do nowadays. Because when we do then expose ourselves to that busyness or to that overstimulation or the abundance of technology, our body, our own intuition will tell us and we'll know firsthand. And that's when it becomes gnosis, where we'll have that firsthand knowledge of what that exactly means for us.
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Going back to nature and being in nature and just taking breaks is so important to create that peace and calmness within.
It's totally like, I think of it a lot like just what you would do in a regular detox. It's like if you're used to eating white sugar all the time and then you take it out for a month or so and get used to what that's like once you've gone through the addiction and the withdrawal and everything, and then you bring a bunch of it back in, you have a very different, you see the relationship for what it's like. And then at least you can then choose, now you know what it's like. So now you can kind of figure out what you want that to be, what works for you, how often, but at least you're kind of having a more clear dynamic with what that relationship is. I feel like then it puts you back in the driver's seat for choosing, because now you kind of know where you're at, right? It gives you a new start point. And as far as for stillness, I think that's the most important thing, is we just need to show up to start doing it. Put it somewhere in your life. And like you said, even if that's a minute, at the outdoor school our kids are at, like they do stillness every day, and now they've worked up to over 10 minutes where they just sit in stillness by a tree, and it's like that's a part of their day. And these are like little kids, and if they can do it, and they're they can be busy, but they've learned from early on to do that. So it's all just training. It's all just establishing what we're capable of doing. Absolutely.
It's just like you said, it's just practice. Thinking about what I ate in my youth going to college, soda and Fruit Loops and Dunkin' Donuts and Twinkies. I mean, I couldn't eat any of it today, or because my diet has completely changed. And, gradually I studied nutrition in the early 1980s and took all the white sugar and white flour out of my house. So my kids pretty much were raised on an organic diet and very healthy. But it's all what you're used to. So they were used to eating that, right, as children, and they tasted other things and they didn't like it. So, and then we lived in New York for a while when the kids were little, and my kids were used to the homemade birthday cake. And some of the kids, we were on Long Island, didn't like the cake. They're like, "What is this? This is not frosting." No, it's real cream. And it even had sugar in it. And they didn't like it because they wanted the thing that comes from the regular grocery store with the sugar frosting. So it's really interesting. It was very eye-opening to see the difference. Now, to me, it was so different because I was raised in Sweden too. So we don't have those kinds of cakes there. People typically have more of a homemade type of cake. Even if you purchase it, it's better nutrient wise than the sugar ones that we have here in the United States. But it is interesting because it's just how that's what they were raised on. So that's what they liked. Just like I liked all the junk food going to college because I was raised in Sweden and I moved to the United States when I was 21. And to live in a dorm where you could take your soda cup and go to the machine and drink as much soda as you wanted, that was just amazing. So, I had so much soda, Coca-Cola for breakfast, Twinkies, Fruit Loops. I mean, it was just junk food because I had never seen junk food before. I was raised in the country of Sweden. We have we're given food in school, hot meals prepared every day. The menu is listed in the Swedish newspapers, what they're going to serve that day. And if you don't like the food that day, I didn't like liver. So then my mom would write a slip, and then I would be allowed to eat the Vasa crisp bread and a glass of milk instead of eating the liver that day. But that's how it was when I was raised. And then I got to the United States. So of course, it's all what we're used to. And, thinking my kids did okay growing up, because they did, as they got older, I had to allow, candy, and other kids had candy, but in moderation. But they never were really crazy about it, which is a good thing. I think it's just everything in moderation. The more you can show your kids and have them sort of make their own choices, that's also helpful. It's the same with alcohol, and kids going to college, they've never tasted wine or beer, and then they just go completely overboard. So that's also, again, very different in the country of Sweden, or in Europe, I think in general, that teenagers typically get to taste a little bit. They get 1 or 2 ounces, they get to toast with everybody else. So it's never that really exciting. That was not exciting to me at all, because I grew up in a different culture where that was just expected that you would toast with a little bit of wine when you were a teenager, not to get you tipsy at all, but just to be part of the ceremony itself. And so it took away that excitement of alcohol after you get old enough to purchase it on your own, because it wasn't exciting anymore. You've been doing it for a couple of years already.
Yeah.
Right. It's just a sip or two when you're a teenager, but you're still part of the ceremony, and you feel very adult because you're now included.
Yeah. Well, and there's more added to it too. It's like context of the situation is different, and then the whole, even what that substance even means to you is something different, right? So yeah, I think as soon as we start to attach really strong labels of this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong, we're going to run into polarizations, right? And then kids are going to have strong extremes on things too. So I think we are coming close to time here on everything, and I think we could talk to you about lots more on here, but
I still wanted to hear, if you don't mind, your first experience with, as near-death experience. What was that like? What was going on in your life? And I understand you were an atheist at the time, as you briefly alluded to earlier as well. And how did that change with that experience?
Yeah, so everything changed. I can and give you the stories of my 2 near-death experiences. The short version.
Sure.
So the first near-death experience happened. So 10 days after she was born, I started hemorrhaging. I went to the ER, was sent home. So the doctor was sent home and back to the ER. And as I'm lying there, started bleeding again. And it was, large blood clots. And as I'm lying on the table in the ER, and they call OBGYN stat to the ER, because now they knew I was in real trouble. And as they're tipping the table backwards to keep my blood in my head, the nurse on my right's quoting my blood pressure, and she yells out, 50/15, hurry. So now my blood pressure is, crashing. And I'm thinking, what's taking her so long? Because the nurse on my left was trying to place an IV, but now I understand my veins were collapsing at that point. So here I am on this table, the atheist that I am. And what do? I pray to God to save my life, because there was nothing else to do. I mean, if there was a God out there, then that was my only shot left. So I pray to God. I say, please let me live. I have 3 children under the age of 6. So my children were 6, 3.5. Those are my boys. And then my newborn baby girl. And shortly after that, I got sucked out of my body and found myself floating above my body about 3 to 5 feet. But in this state, I knew that I had access to past, present, and future information. There is no time in this state when you're outside your body. Time is just something we perceive as we're in our physical body. And, the unconditional love and peace. And I also had this knowing that I belonged to the body down there on the table, but you're still outside. And I'm just thinking, how can this be? How can I be outside my body and still be me? And then I got sucked back in. And then I was really sick, and I got something called bone marrow suppression, or idiopathic aplastic anemia. And I was really sick. So now when I'm struggling to heal, I have a second near-death experience 2 years later. And I always joke that they saved me too fast during the first one, so I didn't get the full effect. So for 2 years, I'm hearing the spirit world and all these crazy things are happening. All my watches are stopping. The television turns on when I walk by it, and this is electrical craziness. And so then I have a second experience, and I get to what I call the mid station, because I knew you could go higher, and I also knew there were levels below me. So it is as if you step into a skyscraper and there are 100 floors. You push the button on the 50th floor. You get off on the 50th floor, but you know there are floors above you and floors below you. So it was that kind of a feeling. So I get to this place, and I call it the bouncing station because they sent me back, like versus some other people who get a choice whether they want to stay. They just said, no, you're going back. So I get to this place, and I hear the most beautiful music, and you can't create this music on the earth plane. I tried because we had a synthesizer, and I tried for, a week to create. There's got to be one sound that sounds like what I heard. No sounds that was that beautiful. And I'm looking around because I'm thinking, where's this music coming from? So I look to the right and I see a log cabin. Just imagine a little log cabin floating in space, because that's what I'm seeing. And I'm opening the door thinking the music is coming from inside this log cabin, but it's empty. So then I look to my left, I see a mirror image of the log cabin I saw on my right. I open the door, look inside, but it's empty. So then I become aware of this growing white light. And as I turn around into this light, it is like you become part of the light, because it extends out into infinity. You are in this light. But this light is like being with God or being with source, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't matter to me what you want to call it. This is what we come from. This is what we return to. And this is just pure unconditional love, because that's who we are at the core. We are made of love. Many people say the universe is built on love. I absolutely agree. It's all about love. But then in this white light, there is an outline of angels, and the music is coming from the angels. But I don't believe in angels. I don't believe in God, but still, this is my experience. So I think it's fascinating, because if you had asked me before I had this experience, I would say, of course, people are just going to see what they believe, right? They're getting confirmation that their beliefs are correct. But that wasn't the case. I experienced things that I didn't believe. So I saw the angels. I said, this is God, this is source. And then 2 spirit guides communicate. So one spirit guide communicates with the other spirit guides, and he says, what is she doing here? She can't be here. She has to go back. And I said, no, wait a second. How can this be? How can I be outside my body and still be me? Because I've been thinking about this for 2 years already. That's, am I going crazy? Is this some kind of hallucination in the brain, or what happens? And the spirit guide on my left said, well, if I told you, you wouldn't remember. So there is some kind of wiping out your memory effect that I've heard other people talk about too. There is some way that they can control what we get to remember. And so he says, but you'll remember this. And then it is as if I'm standing on the moon and I'm looking down on the earth, but around the earth is what I called a silvery, glittery fishnet. And I call it the fishnet because I grew up in Sweden and spent my summers in the archipelago on an island with no electricity or running water. And I would row the boat for my grandmother early in the morning. I was very proud when I finally graduated to be a rower. So because I had 3 older brothers, so finally it was my turn to have this prestigious moment to row the boat. And so when she lifted these nets out of the ocean in the early morning sun, we would lay like 5 nets in the ocean. The water droplets on this fishnet, and they tend to be diamond shaped, right? A fishnet, they sort of glitter in the sun. So I'm seeing this image of this. Now you can just Google grid around the earth, but we didn't have internet then, so there was no Google. And so I always referred to it as the fishnet, the glittery fishnet around the earth. And the spirit guide said that everything on earth is connected to each other, and everything on earth is connected up to this grid. And today, we're starting to understand how interconnected we really are. And I see that when I work with ancestral healing and how connected we are to our ancestors. We think that we are so independent, but we are actually quite connected. And we know that from physics too, that all the physics and scientists that are starting to understand the non-locality of atoms and out there in space, and what happens to one atom is going to happen to the other atom. And so we are all interconnected that way. So now it makes perfect sense. Of course, we're all connected, and we are connected not just to each other, but to everything on Earth. So if you look at your body and you have all these organs and all these different blood cells, but if you look at the whole world, maybe we're just the blood cells. All of humanity is just one type of a blood cell for the Earth itself. All at one species of animal is another blood cell. All the trees is another blood cell. And what I'm saying, so it's making up, the Earth itself is a living organism, but then we're part of space, and our whole solar system, right? Our little universe that we live in and that we know about is a living organism in itself. And everything is interconnected through time and space, but also within ourselves here on Earth. And that's why we have to start to work together and work together as a human race to create peace here on Earth, and so that we can create living conditions for future generations. Because if we don't, we'll probably all become extinct after, not so many years, because we're going in the wrong direction. And we have to change that direction and reconnect with each other and with nature.
Yeah. Well, that's why it's so important to just everybody connect back more to who we really are, and then start to live from that place. Because ultimately, if each individual's doing their piece, then the whole starts to create healing anyways. It's just the way that it works. I think as soon as we start to think too much of like, I need to heal the world, but I'm jumping ahead of healing myself, we're kind of missing the boat too. It's, it's every individual, all hands on deck kind of a job. And I think all it really needs is just people to show up more as who they really truly are, connected to the truth of who they are. And then I think that just can shift really quickly. I really think stuff can happen very quickly, but it's a collaborative effort.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is a huge awakening on Earth, and people stepping up to the plate to create healing for themselves and others.
Can you speak a little bit more about that, Dr. Lotte? Like, what is your perspective on what we're currently experiencing right now?
I would say there's a lot of different organizations throughout the world that are working in different ways to create healing and to create understanding, raising consciousness, opening people's minds, that we need to work together, because we cannot continue with this self-destructive model that we have created with war and politics and greed. And it's this, everybody who lives in their country, we're also trained to believe that we're living the best country in the world. And, the United States is as guilty of doing things as the countries that we place blame on, and saying that they're the ones that are the bad guys, but we are the bad guys too. And it's just a matter, I think, for a lot of, if the people wake up, the politicians will wake up, because once the people wake up, it demands change. So it's like that with everything. So it's the people that push that. And the more people that awaken and understand that we need to change, we need to be accepting, we need to all work together. And that, I think, is happening because there's so many different organizations that do work, for all different things, saving the bees, organic farming, all different consciousness, and getting together and accepting, and all different levels. But there's so much more work to do. But for everybody that steps up to that plate, we generate healing in the world. Mm-hmm. And we create a shift.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Lotte, in closing here, what would be the, from I'm just going to wrap this up here with you, and there could be lots of pieces to this, but from your experience and just everything you've kind of gone through with the near-death experiences, going through med school, all of it, what would be some of the top few lessons that you would want to impart on the viewers that have really kind of reshaped the way that you live?
I'd say understanding that we are eternal, and that we're all connected. Everything is divine. It is a divine plan that we're living in. And not to forget that every single one of the people that are out there listening to this, they're all a divine creature themselves, and they all have a purpose in life. Even when we don't know what our purpose is, we all have a purpose. And most of us, I think, go through life without knowing what that purpose is. Once you get to the other side, you said, wow, I did a pretty good job. I checked off all those things I signed up for. Because sometimes it can just be simple things. It doesn't have to be that you're going to be a astronaut, the first person on the moon, or anything like that. It can just be you're raising a family, and these are the different things you're learning in this life. And you're a good citizen, and you started organic farming, and you had an awakening, how important you are as a contributor to being here on Earth.
When we've talked to some of the other guests, a lot of it is that it's not these almost more human-made kind of attributes that are that important. It's more of how we are with one another, how we're capable of loving one another, how we're capable of embodying more of who we truly are and listening to who we truly are and putting more of that into the world. It's not these things that we've kind of given prestige to from more of a human perspective, right? Which sometimes we think has to be our sole purpose, has to be this big extravagant thing. And a lot of times from what we've heard back too is when they've received the messages from the other side, or when they've gone through their life review, it's very different than what in many ways it's been completely backwards, as Nancy talked about, Nancy Dennison in her book. It's literally completely backwards to what we think it is from a more of a human perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It can be quite simple, and it's staring us in the face, but we're searching, and we're always searching for the future instead of just being present. Because that's really all there is just presence.
It's funny. It's like that idea that we feel like we've got to work for things so hard to make it. It's not that sometimes we don't have to, but it's often too, like you said, sometimes it can literally be just right there, and we just need to kind of avail ourselves to it. So
yeah, I mean, who knows? Maybe you just incarnated to bring healing to the world through a podcast. That was it. That's your number one thing to do, right? You're already doing it, but internally you're thinking, oh, what else is there? What else is there? But most of us are already doing the things we incarnated to do.
Beautiful. Dr. Lotte, where can people learn more about the work you're doing? Where can we send people to so they can catch other things that you're doing? Where can they get your book?
Yeah, you also have a podcast, so if you could share all that info with us.
Yeah, so to learn more about me, just go to drlotte.com, drlotte.com. And on there, you can learn about what I do as a physician and working spiritually with people. So I work as a medical medium. I do psychic and evidential mediumship readings, etc. So you can learn more about that there. And I also host a podcast that's called Dr. Lotte, Science with Soul. And that's, again, all over all the different podcast platforms. It's on YouTube, etc. And so I think that's the easiest way. Just go to my website has links to the podcast as well. So if you just go to drlotte.com, you can learn most things about me.
Awesome. Thank you. I have a quick question, and I hope I'm not imposing. But I wonder if you have anything to share with us, or anything that we need to hear at this time for Jason and I on this podcast and the Multiversity platform that we're about to introduce to the audience as well. If there's anything that we need to know.
I think you guys are doing a great job, and just continue what you're doing, because just by listening to your own internal messages, you're being guided already. You might not realize how guided you are, but just follow that path. When you have an idea, oh, maybe we should do this, just go for it. Let's go. The worst thing that could happen is that something fails, but just keep going, because that is the message you're bringing to the world, is to bring information to the people, because you're awakening your listeners and helping them raise consciousness. And we can't do it by ourselves. We all have to work together, but that's what has to happen in order for us to create a better world.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you
Lotte.
very much. It was such a pleasure getting to speak with you about everything.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.